The morning was deceptively perfect. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the luxurious Fifth Avenue apartment, bathing the living room in a warm, golden glow. Evelyn Carter was putting the finishing touches on breakfast while her daughter, Sophie, played with the family cat. Richard Carter, as usual, was on the phone, discussing contracts and strategies. It was a routine Evelyn knew well, but in recent months, it had taken on an air of tension. Richard had been more distant, his smiles rarer, and his business trips more frequent. She understood that running a billion-dollar tech company was demanding, but something about his behavior stirred her suspicions. Still, that morning, she chose to ignore her instincts and focus on their farewell. He was leaving in a few hours for an important meeting in Boston. "I'll be back in 2 days," Richard promised, pressing a quick kiss to Evelyn's forehead. He hugged Sophie tightly, whispering something that made the little girl laugh. Evelyn watched him leave, unaware that it would be the last time she saw him as the man she thought she knew. 2 days later, the phone rang. Evelyn answered quickly, expecting to hear her husband's familiar voice. Instead, there was silence, followed by the cautious tone of an assistant. "Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Carter didn't attend the meeting, and we haven't been able to locate him since." The words hit her like a punch. She tried to rationalize. Maybe he was delayed or dealing with travel issues. But hours turned into days, and Richard never showed up. Fear gave way to panic. Evelyn contacted the police, who launched an investigation. She replayed every detail of the day he left, searching for something out of the ordinary. Photos of Richard began circulating in the media, accompanied by sensational headlines: "Billionaire missing," "Kidnapping or escape." The void he left was devastating. Evelyn spent sleepless nights listening to detectives' theories and reporters' speculations, but no answers emerged. Sophie, too young to fully grasp the situation, asked innocently, "Mommy, doesn't Daddy want to come home anymore?" The question broke her heart, but Evelyn forced a smile and said, "He'll come back, sweetheart. We just need to be patient." Months turned into a year. Evelyn began to feel Richard's absence in unexpected ways. Credit cards were frozen, household bills piled up, and the company's desperate board members took legal action to declare him officially missing. The pristine mansion began to feel empty, suffocating. On the second anniversary of his disappearance, the court officially declared Richard dead in a brief, cold hearing. Evelyn felt as though she'd been buried along with him. She wasn't just the widow of a missing man now. She was a broke, single mother with a child to raise. Determined to shield Sophie from more losses, Evelyn made a drastic decision. She sold the mansion and all their remaining assets to move to a small coastal town, far from prying eyes and intrusive media. "We're starting over, my love," she promised Sophie as they drove to their new home, a modest house near the sea. But Evelyn's promise masked a painful truth. She didn't know where to begin. The town was simple, a place where no one knew her name or what she had lost. That was both a comfort and a source of despair. As she tried to rebuild their lives, Evelyn found work as an assistant at a small local bookstore. Sophie, meanwhile, seemed to adapt well, making friends and smiling more often. But Evelyn knew that, behind her daughter's innocent eyes, Sophie still felt her father's absence. One night, while going through old photo albums, Evelyn found a note Richard had left during one of his trips. The simple, heartfelt words brought tears to her eyes. "Never forget. You and Sophie are my life. I'll always come back to you." She clutched the note to her chest, letting the tears fall freely. It was a cruel contrast to her reality. He hadn't come back, and the void he left felt impossible to fill. One morning, while serving coffee at a small local diner, a customer caught Evelyn's attention. It was a tall woman with dark hair, nervously flipping through a magazine. Evelyn didn't pay much attention until she noticed the magazine's cover. A photo of Richard with a bold headline, "The Carter Mystery. New clues emerge in Europe." Evelyn felt her world stop. The coffee slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. She approached the woman, who froze upon realizing Evelyn was staring at her. Before Evelyn could speak, the woman placed a note on the table and hurried out. The note read only, "Look in Paris." Evelyn spent the entire night rereading the message the mysterious woman had left at the restaurant. "Look in Paris." The words echoed in her mind, bringing back a flood of emotions. After 2 years of accepting Richard's death as final, this unexpected clue reignited not just hope, but also pain. What if it's a trap? Rachel, her best friend and the only person Evelyn still trusted, asked cautiously. "You know how the media loves to toy with these things." "It could be," Evelyn replied, staring at the note in her hands. "But what if it's not? What if he's alive?" Rachel hesitated. She knew trying to dissuade Evelyn was pointless. Since Richard's disappearance, her friend hadn't had a moment of real peace. Now, Evelyn seemed willing to risk everything for a lead that might go nowhere. The following days were filled with preparations and growing tension. Evelyn left Sophie in Rachel's care, promising to return as soon as she had answers. While organizing documents and researching Paris, an old photo of Richard in the city fell out of one of their albums. In it, he stood in front of the Louvre, wearing a relaxed smile that Evelyn almost didn't recognize. As she boarded the plane, Evelyn felt a mix of nerves and determination. She knew she was venturing into the unknown, but something inside her said she had to do this, for herself and for Sophie. Arriving in Paris felt like stepping into a different world. The city, vibrant and steeped in history, seemed indifferent to the turmoil Evelyn felt. She walked through the bustling streets with the photo of Richard in her pocket, hoping to find some connection to the message she had received. Evelyn began her search in the city's tourist hotspots, but quickly realized the futility. Paris was enormous, and she had no idea where to start. Then, in a quiet cafe in the Montmartre neighborhood, she overheard a conversation that made her heart race. "Did you see Lucas today?" a waitress asked her coworker. "He stopped by last night with his wife." Evelyn turned abruptly to the waitress. "Excuse me, did you say Lucas? What does he look like?" The waitress, confused, described a man who perfectly matched Richard's appearance. Brown hair, intense eyes, and a reserved demeanor. "Does he come here often?" Evelyn pressed, trying to hide her nerves. "Yes, he and his wife. They seem like a happy family." Evelyn felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The first time she saw him, it was from a distance. Evelyn was standing in a crowded square, holding a coffee she could barely drink. And then there he was, Richard. But he wasn't alone. Beside him was an elegant woman with blonde hair and a confident gaze. 2 children laughed and ran around Richard, who seemed completely at ease in his role as a father and husband. Evelyn froze, unable to process what she was seeing. It was like watching a stranger. Richard, or Lucas, as he now seemed to be called, looked happy, as if his old life had never existed. Evelyn spent the next few days trying to gather the courage to confront him. During this time, she began to uncover more about the life Richard had built. Through careful conversations with locals and cafe employees, she learned he was known as Lucas Moreau, a successful consultant and seemingly devoted family man. The woman he lived with, Clara, was a renowned artist who owned a gallery in the city center. The children, twins about 6 years old, were described as the couple's joy. Evelyn felt torn between anger and confusion. How could Richard have abandoned her and Sophie to create a new life? But the idea of amnesia, mentioned by the waitress in a casual conversation, began to take root in her mind. What if he truly didn't remember anything? Finally, Evelyn gathered the courage to approach him. She found him in a bookstore, flipping through a book while Clara and the children were in another aisle. "Richard," she called out, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he asked, his French accent flawless. Evelyn's heart raced. He seemed genuinely perplexed. "Of course you do. I'm Evelyn. I'm your wife." The words hung in the air, creating an unbearable silence. Richard, or Lucas, looked lost. "You're mistaken," he said, stepping back. "My name is Lucas. I don't know who you are." Evelyn frantically reached into her bag, pulling out a photo of the two of them on their wedding anniversary. "Look at this. Don't you remember?" He stared at the photo for a long moment, something in his expression shifting. Before he could respond, Clara appeared, her face filled with suspicion. "Who is this woman?" Clara demanded, gripping Lucas's arm. Evelyn felt her anger rising. "I'm the woman he left behind in the United States. I'm the mother of his daughter." The tension was palpable. Clara looked at Lucas, waiting for an explanation, but he remained silent, his expression unreadable. That night, Evelyn returned to the small hotel where she was staying, utterly drained. Everything pointed to Richard no longer being the man she once knew, but Evelyn couldn't ignore what she saw in his eyes when she showed him the photo. Was he lying? Or did he truly believe he was someone else? As she tried to process everything, her phone buzzed with a message. The number was unknown, but the content was clear. "There are things you don't understand. Meet me at Clara's gallery tomorrow night. Don't tell anyone. Let's play a game with those who've only read the comments." Type Paris in the comments if you've read this far. Now let's continue with the story ***. The anonymous message Evelyn received echoed in her mind as she walked through the streets of Paris the next day. The promise of answers was tempting, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead set her nerves on edge. Even so, she knew she had to move forward. At 8 in the evening, Evelyn arrived at Clara's gallery. The place was empty and dimly lit, the artwork on the walls casting eerie shadows under the faint light. Every step she took echoed on the marble floor, amplifying the tension in the air. "You came." The voice emerged from one of the adjacent rooms. Evelyn turned sharply and found Clara standing there, her gaze cold and calculating. It wasn't the person she had expected to meet. "You sent the message?" Evelyn asked, crossing her arms defensively. Clara nodded. "We need to talk," Clara began. "But not here." The two women moved to a small room in the back of the gallery. The tension between them was almost palpable. Evelyn didn't know if Clara was an enemy or an ally, but something in her expression suggested there was more to the story than she realized. "What do you want from me?" Evelyn asked, cutting straight to the point. Clara sighed, running a hand through her impeccably styled blonde hair. "I want you to understand the truth about Lucas, or Richard, as you call him." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "So you know who he really is." "I've always known," Clara admitted. "From the very beginning." The words hit Evelyn like a blow. She blinked, stunned. "You knew? And yet I took him in," Clara interrupted. "He was lost with no memory, no idea who he was. When I found him, he was just a broken man trying to survive." Clara began to explain. 2 years ago, Richard had been found on a deserted road in southern France, severely injured and without identification. He didn't remember anything: his identity, his past, or his life. Clara, who was traveling through the area at the time, had been the one to rescue him and nurse him back to health. "He became Lucas because he needed a new identity," Clara said. "He was a second chance for me, just as I was for him." Evelyn, however, wasn't convinced. "You're saying he lost his memory? But how can you be sure? How do you know he's not pretending?" Clara hesitated, as if unsure of the answer. "Maybe you should ask him yourself." Evelyn wasted no time. That night, she returned to her hotel and sent Lucas a simple message. Asterisk, "We need to talk. Just the two of us." Asterisk. He responded quicker than she expected, agreeing to meet the next day at a cafe near the Seine. Evelyn spent the night wide awake, replaying everything Clara had said and trying to decipher Richard, or Lucas's, intentions. When she met him, he seemed uncomfortable but not hostile. Sitting at the cafe table, there was something in his posture that reminded her of the man she had loved, though his eyes carried a disturbing emptiness. "You're here," he said, as if still surprised she had found him. "I need answers," Evelyn replied bluntly. "Clara told me her version of the story. Now I want to hear yours." Lucas sighed, his gaze drifting toward the river. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Why did you abandon us? What really happened to you?" He took a long time to answer, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "I don't know who I was before the accident. I don't remember you or my life in the United States. All I know is what Clara told me." "And you believed her?" Evelyn demanded, indignation flaring. "You didn't try to find out more?" Lucas hesitated. "I did. First I tried, but no one seemed to know me. There were no records, no clues. So I accepted what Clara offered me." Evelyn felt her anger surge. "You had a family, a daughter, and you gave up on us so easily." "Easily?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Do you think it was easy waking up not knowing who I was, with no one looking for me?" His words hit her hard, but Evelyn refused to relent. "I looked for you," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "For 2 years, I searched for you. I never stopped believing you were alive." The silence that followed was unbearable. Lucas looked at her with something resembling regret, but also confusion. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said finally, "but I'm not that man anymore." Evelyn felt the weight of his words, but something inside her refused to give up. You may not remember me, but that doesn't mean our story is over. She pulled a photo of Sophie from her pocket. It was from the last Christmas they had spent together, the little girl smiling as Richard held her on his shoulders. Lucas took the photo, studying it carefully. For a moment, Evelyn thought she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. "This is my daughter?" he asked softly. "Yes. She needs you, Richard." Lucas returned the photo slowly, looking more conflicted than ever. "I need time to think," he said, standing up. Evelyn watched him walk away, a mix of frustration and hope swelling in her chest. For the first time, it seemed like the man she had known was still there, buried beneath the new identity he had created. Later that evening, as she returned to her hotel, Evelyn was approached by a man who appeared to have been waiting for her. "Are you Evelyn Carter?" he asked. She nodded, eyeing him with suspicion. "My name is Charles DuPont. I was Richard's business partner. There are things about his disappearance that you need to know." Evelyn stared at Charles DuPont, a stern-looking man whose eyes seemed to harbor countless secrets. He led her to a discreet cafe far from Paris's tourist hotspots, insisting the matter was too delicate to discuss in public. As the man spoke, Evelyn realized the puzzle pieces were far from fitting together. Richard didn't disappear by accident, DuPont began after a long pause. He was targeted by a dangerous scheme involving his company. Evelyn frowned, leaning forward. "Scheme? What kind of scheme?" "Corporate fraud on a massive scale," DuPont explained. 2 years ago, before he vanished, Richard discovered a group of investors siphoning millions from his company. When he tried to expose them, he received serious threats. Evelyn felt her stomach churn. "So he ran?" "Not exactly," DuPont replied enigmatically. "He disappeared during a trip, and the last time I saw him was in France, just before the accident Clara mentioned. But there's something you need to know. I don't think he lost his memory by chance." "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, panic rising in her chest. "I think he was manipulated, maybe even drugged. There's no proof, but the circumstances are too suspicious to be a coincidence." Evelyn didn't know whether to feel anger, fear, or disbelief. "You're telling me his new life was built on a lie?" "That's what it looks like," DuPont replied. "But the question is, Evelyn, what are you going to do with this information?" She didn't answer immediately. DuPont's words swirled in her mind, leaving her even more uncertain about Richard or Lucas's motivations. The next day, Evelyn decided to confront Clara again. She knew the artist had more answers than she was willing to admit. When she arrived at the gallery, Clara was alone, setting up an exhibit. "We need to talk," Evelyn said firmly. Clara looked at her, seemingly prepared for the confrontation. "About what exactly?" "About Richard and what you really know about him." Clara sighed, setting down the papers in her hands. "You think you're accusing me of something, but the truth is, I'm just as much a victim as you are." "Evelyn." "Victim?" Evelyn scoffed bitterly. "You knew who he was the whole time and kept him away from me and his daughter. And what was I supposed to do?" Clara shot back, her voice rising. "He didn't remember anything, and I fell in love with him." Evelyn hesitated, Clara sounded sincere, but the way she avoided her eyes suggested she wasn't telling the whole truth. If you truly loved him, why didn't you tell him the truth? Clara was silent for a long moment before finally replying, because I was afraid of losing him, and because I was afraid of what he might discover. Afraid of what? Evelyn pressed. Clara opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, Evelyn's phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas. Asterisk, meet me at the Luxembourg Gardens at 5 p.m. I need to talk to you. Asterisk. Clara saw the name on the screen and closed her eyes as if she had just lost a battle. He's starting to remember, isn't he? Clara whispered. Evelyn left without answering, but Clara's expression stayed with her. The Luxembourg Gardens looked especially beautiful that afternoon, but Evelyn barely noticed. When she saw Lucas standing near a fountain, she approached quickly, her heart pounding. You asked me to come here, she began. Why? Lucas seemed agitated, running his hands through his hair as if trying to organize his thoughts. Since we met, I've been having flashes, fragments of things that don't make sense. What do you remember? Evelyn asked, her voice brimming with hope. A little girl. She's laughing, and I'm singing something to her. Evelyn felt tears well up in her eyes. That's Sophie. You used to sing to her before bedtime. Lucas looked shaken, as if he was trying to process the information. And then there's you. I see you, but I don't know where the memory comes from. Evelyn took his hands, feeling for the first time like she was truly connecting with the man she loved. You have to trust me, Richard. Your life was taken from you, but you can still get it back. He stared at her, confused and vulnerable. And if I can't, what if the man you knew doesn't exist anymore? He does, Evelyn said with conviction. I see it in you. As they walked through the park, Lucas confessed that he had found old documents among Clara's belongings suggesting she knew more about his past than she had let on. Evelyn suggested they confront her together, but Lucas hesitated. I don't know if I want to find out more, he said, his voice heavy with doubt. What if it destroys the life I have now? Evelyn stopped walking, turning to face him. Your new life is built on lies, Richard. No matter what happens, you deserve to know the truth. He remained silent, but Evelyn could see the conflict in his eyes. That night, as Evelyn tried to sort through her thoughts in her hotel room, she received a call from DuPont. We need to meet, he said urgently. I just got a call from a contact in Switzerland. They've uncovered something about the investors who threatened Richard. And you won't believe what I've found. Evelyn had no idea what to expect, but she was sure of one thing. The mystery was far from over. Let's play a trick on those who only read the comments. Type hotel in the comments if you've made it this far. Let's continue. Asterisk asterisk. Evelyn entered the small cafe where she had agreed to meet Charles DuPont. He was already waiting, a stack of documents spread across the table. His demeanor was more tense than before, as though he was grappling with something he didn't want to confront. What did you find? Evelyn asked as she sat down. DuPont took a deep breath, sliding a folder toward her. These are financial records for a Swiss bank account. The account was opened under the name Richard Carter, or Lucas Moreau, as he's now known. Evelyn flipped through the papers, her heart racing as she scanned the figures. "What does this mean?" she asked, confused. "It means someone was funneling millions into this account right after his disappearance," DuPont explained. "And the person who authorized these transfers was directly connected to the investors who threatened Richard." Evelyn froze. "You're saying they paid to make him disappear?" DuPont hesitated before answering. "That's what it looks like. The accident, the memory loss. It could all have been orchestrated to remove him from the equation." The weight of this revelation left Evelyn speechless. It was as if the puzzle pieces were finally coming together, but the picture they formed was darker than anything she could have imagined. "And Clara?" Evelyn asked, her mind returning to the woman who now seemed central to the mystery. "I don't have concrete proof yet," DuPont admitted. "But I believe she knew exactly who Richard was from the start." Evelyn returned to her hotel room feeling torn. Part of her wanted to confront Clara immediately, but another part knew she needed Richard's help. He was the key to uncovering the truth, but convincing him to accept this reality would be a challenge. When she arrived at the hotel, she found Lucas waiting for her in the lobby. He looked exhausted but resolute. "We need to talk," he said. Evelyn led him to her room and explained everything DuPont had uncovered. As she spoke, she noticed the change in Lucas's expression. He no longer seemed confused or hesitant but determined. "So you think Clara knew all along?" he asked, his voice tinged with incredulity. "I don't think," Evelyn replied. "I'm certain." Lucas fell silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "I need to hear it from her." They went to the gallery that same night. Clara was setting up a new exhibit when she saw them enter, her expression hardening immediately. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Lucas stepped forward, holding the documents Evelyn had given him. "I want the truth, Clara." From the beginning, Clara hesitated, but the look in Lucas's eyes made her falter. She knew she couldn't lie anymore. "Fine. You want the truth? I knew who you were from the moment I found you." Evelyn held her breath as Lucas stared at her, waiting for her to continue. "When I found you on that road, you were gravely injured. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but then I recognized your face from an old news story. I realized who you were." "And you decided to hide me?" Lucas asked, his voice low but laden with emotion. "I did it to protect you," Clara exclaimed, desperation seeping into her tone. "Those men who threatened you were still after you. If I had told you the truth, they would have found you." Evelyn cut in. "It's not just that, is it? You didn't keep him hidden just to protect him. You wanted him for yourself." Clara turned to Evelyn, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I fell in love with him, but that doesn't mean I lied about the risks." Lucas shook his head, as if trying to process everything. "You should have given me the choice." Clara broke down in tears, but Lucas didn't wait for more answers. He turned to Evelyn, a new resolve in his eyes. "I need to face this. Memory or not, it's time to find out who I really am." That same night, Lucas and Evelyn met with DuPont again. The plan was simple. Use the information they had to confront the investors who had threatened Richard and finally uncover the full truth. DuPont explained that one of the investors, a man named Vincent Marchand, was in Paris. Known for his ties to the corporate underworld, Marchand was their best lead. He'll deny everything, DuPont warned. But if we push hard enough, he might slip. Lucas seemed ready, but Evelyn couldn't hide her concern. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. I have to, he replied. For you, for Sophie, and for myself. The meeting with Marchand took place in an upscale restaurant in central Paris. Evelyn and Lucas approached him while DuPont observed from a distance. Mr. Marchand, we have some questions for you, Lucas began, his voice steady. The man looked up, clearly surprised to see him. Richard Carter? Or should I say Lucas? Marchand said with a cynical smile. I never thought I'd see you again. Lucas didn't waste time. I want the truth. What happened to me and why? Marchand chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to his demeanor. You really want to know? You were a problem we needed to solve. You got too close to exposing things that could have destroyed us all. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. So you had me attacked, Lucas continued. We gave you a way out, Marchand said, leaning forward. You should be grateful. The life you have now was a gift. Lucas stood abruptly, but Evelyn grabbed his arm. Don't let him provoke you, she whispered. Marchand realized he had gone too far. Look, there's nothing more to uncover here. If I were you, I'd enjoy the life you have and forget the rest. Lucas shook his head, disgust evident on his face. You're wrong. My life is in the United States, with my daughter and my wife. Evelyn felt her heart race at his words. As they left the restaurant, Lucas seemed like a different man. He had regained something he had lost all that time, his identity. Let's go home, Evelyn, he said, taking her hand. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face, but this time, they were tears of relief. The flight back to the United States was marked by a reflective silence between Evelyn and Lucas. As the plane crossed the ocean, Evelyn watched Lucas, who stared out the window with a grave expression. It was as if he were preparing to face not just what he had left behind, but also the consequences of everything he had learned. Are you nervous? Evelyn asked softly. Lucas turned away from the window, a bitter smile on his lips. It's not exactly nervousness. It's more fear that I won't be enough for Sophie. Evelyn felt a pang in her chest. She loves you. She's always loved you. That hasn't changed. Lucas nodded, but the weight of the moment was palpable. He was returning to a life that felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. When they arrived, Sophie was waiting in Rachel's garden. The moment she saw the car, she ran toward Evelyn but stopped abruptly when she noticed Lucas stepping out of the vehicle. For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes wide. Daddy? Lucas hesitated, seeming frozen in place. Then Sophie ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. You're back. I knew you'd come back. Her words, filled with emotion, shattered any walls Lucas still felt. He held her tightly, tears streaming down his face as he murmured, I'm here, Sophie. I'm here. Evelyn watched the scene, tears brimming in her own eyes. After so long, their family finally felt whole again. In the weeks that followed, Lucas devoted himself to rebuilding his relationship with Sophie. He walked her to school, played with her at the park, and even learned the songs she liked, trying to make up for lost time. Sophie seemed to adapt quickly to having her father back, but Evelyn noticed Lucas was still grappling with his own internal struggles. "Do you think this is enough?" he asked one night as they tucked Sophie into bed. "You're here now, Richard. That's what matters." But Evelyn knew the wounds left by the years of separation wouldn't heal easily. Meanwhile, the impact of Lucas's return began to ripple outward. The company he had left behind was in shambles after the financial scandals caused by the corrupt investors, and the media quickly latched onto his story. Reporters camped outside their home, demanding answers about his disappearance and his new life in France. "We need to face this head-on," Evelyn said. "We can't keep running from the past." Lucas agreed, but the idea of revisiting everything that had happened still unsettled him. The tension escalated when Clara appeared unexpectedly at their door. Evelyn opened it, surprised to see her standing there. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked, her tone as composed as she could manage. Clara looked tired but resolute. "I'm not here to cause problems. I just want to talk to Lucas." Evelyn hesitated before calling Lucas, who appeared with an unreadable expression. "Clara, I didn't expect to see you." Clara forced a smile. "I just wanted to say I understand why you chose to come back. It wasn't easy, but I accept it." Lucas was silent for a moment before responding. "I never wanted to hurt you, Clara. You were important to me, even though I didn't know who I really was." Clara nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know. I just want you to be happy." Evelyn watched the scene from a distance, feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort. Clara was letting Lucas go, but the marks of her presence would linger. A few days later, Lucas made a decision that surprised Evelyn. "I want to reclaim my company," he said, his renewed determination evident. Evelyn looked uneasy. "That's going to bring more media attention." "Are you sure?" "Yes. They destroyed something I worked so hard to build, and I won't let them get away with it." With DuPont's help, Lucas gathered the evidence needed to take legal action against the corrupt investors. News of his return and his fight to regain control of the company spread quickly, thrusting him back into the public eye. Despite the pressure, Lucas remained steadfast, and Evelyn supported him every step of the way. Together, they worked to rebuild not only their financial stability but also their emotional foundation. One night, as they watched Sophie sleep, Lucas turned to Evelyn and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Evelyn smiled, holding his hand. "That was never an option, Richard." Slowly, the family began to find a new balance. The battles ahead were far from over, but the love and strength they shared seemed enough to face whatever came their way. As the night settled in, a sense of peace enveloped Evelyn that she hadn't felt in years. She knew the sacrifices they had made were worth it, and that, at last, they were on the right path. Are you enjoying the story? Want to hear more like this? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so we can keep you updated. ****. The months following Lucas's return were challenging but also transformative. He, Evelyn, and Sophie began rebuilding their lives, piece by piece, with a renewed determination not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Lucas was deeply involved in recovering his company. After suing the corrupt investors and exposing the scheme that had nearly destroyed him, he managed to attract allies to rebuild the business. However, the victory came with an emotional toll. His return to high society brought back probing questions and judgmental glances about his disappearance. "Are you sure you want to stay in this world?" Evelyn asked one evening as they sat on the porch. Lucas took her hand, gazing at the starry sky. "It's not just about the company. It's about us. I want to make sure you and Sophie have everything you need." Evelyn smiled, but she knew Lucas was also trying to rediscover his place in the world. Meanwhile, Sophie seemed increasingly happy with her father back in her life. The two established simple rituals like park outings and afternoons reading together. One day, as Lucas helped Sophie with a school project, she looked up at him and asked, "Are you going to stay forever now, Daddy?" Lucas stopped what he was doing, meeting her gaze with a seriousness Evelyn recognized. "I promise, Sophie. I'll never leave you again." The words brought tears to Evelyn's eyes as she watched from the kitchen. Despite all the challenges, that moment proved they were on the right path. Even with their progress, the shadows of the past lingered. Clara, despite saying goodbye to Lucas in Paris, sent a letter weeks later expressing her final thoughts. "Lucas, you taught me to love again, even amidst uncertainty. I hope you find peace and happiness with your family. I will always remember you, but I know my place is not by your side. Take good care of Sophie. She's lucky to have you as her father." Lucas read the letter in silence, closing his eyes for a moment before tucking it into a drawer. Evelyn found the letter later but said nothing. She knew Clara was part of Lucas's journey and that he needed time to process it all. As Sophie's birthday approached, Lucas insisted on organizing a party, something he had never had the chance to do before. He spent weeks planning every detail, from the decorations to the cake. On the day of the party, the house was filled with children, laughter, and colorful balloons. Evelyn watched Lucas interacting with the guests, more relaxed and smiling than she had ever seen him. She realized he was finally finding the peace he had been searching for. "You're different," she said, walking up to him. "Different how?" he asked, teasingly. "More like yourself," she replied, taking his hand. Lucas smiled, kissing her forehead. "That's because now I know exactly where I belong." Later that night, as they cleaned up the remnants of the party, Lucas brought Evelyn an unexpected gift. A small photo album he had put together with pictures of Sophie and her from the years he had been gone. "I wasn't here, but I want to remember everything," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Evelyn opened the album, tears streaming as she saw the moments Lucas now wanted to reclaim. "Thank you for coming back," she said, embracing him. Lucas held her tightly. "Thank you for finding me." In the months that followed, the family began planning a new chapter. Lucas decided to sell the company and focus on smaller projects that allowed him to spend more time with Evelyn and Sophie. They bought a house in a quiet town far from the chaos of New York, where they could build a future that was simple yet meaningful. The move brought a sense of renewal. Evelyn returned to her work as a book editor, something she had always loved, while Lucas helped Sophie with the science club at her school. One sunny day, while walking along the beach, Sophie stopped and held each of their hands. "You promised we'd never be apart again, right?" she asked, looking up at them. Evelyn and Lucas exchanged a glance before answering together. "Never." Years later, while sorting through old boxes in a closet, Evelyn found the note Richard had left before he disappeared. Asterisk, never forget. You and Sophie are my life. I will always come back to you. Asterisk. She read it with a smile, realizing that despite everything, he had kept his promise. When she walked into the living room, she found Lucas and Sophie laughing together as they worked on a puzzle. It was a simple moment, but it represented everything they had fought to achieve. Evelyn sat down beside them, feeling a deep peace. At last, they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you were in Evelyn's place, would you have fought for your family or accepted the reality and moved on? Let me know in the comments. Asterisk, asterisk.